Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something that's equal parts terrifying and absolutely fascinating. We're stepping right into a grim, dark, gothic fable, a deep philosophical descent from a claustrophobic sheltered valley straight out into the howling, absolute unknown of the void. We're going to be digging into some intense source material that cracks open the very foundations of how we define right and wrong, using Nietzschean philosophy and philology as our guide. We'll be tracking the path of those who suddenly realized their sanctuary was actually a cage. It is a heavy, brilliant text, and it's going to guide us step by step through this really dark intellectual labyrinth. So let's jump right in. They did not choose the good. The good was simply the shape their chains left once they had stopped struggling long enough to admire it. This marginal gloss from the Codex fragment instantly sets the stage for the incredibly bleak world of the valley we're looking at today. Imagine living in a place where generations pass more quietly than they arrive. The people here, they don't remember actually choosing their laws, they just inherited them. Kind of the way a river remembers no source, only the banks that can find it. They wear their morality not as some noble badge of honor, but as a set of chains they've been locked in for so long they've actually started calling them beautiful.
So let's put on our philological detective hats for a second and really look at how this valley defined the word good. Because it absolutely wasn't a moral claim about justice or righteousness. Not at all. It was just a gilded word, repeated by the people the exact same way an infant repeats a comforting sound. To them, good literally meant one thing and one thing only: safe. They completely swallow the ceiling as the sky. Because they'd never actually seen the real sky, the cold stone roof above their heads became their entire universe, and they called it good simply because it kept the rain out.
But, of course, safety in the valley wasn't free. The scribes, these unquestioned, absolute authorities of this world, enforced an incredibly rigid transaction. Just imagine the scribes' voices, chilling and absolute, echoing right off the valley walls. Paying is the toll fee for shelter. To ask for shelter without paying the toll is the only true sin. Suffering here was never questioned. It was never seen as an evil that needed to be abolished. It was just accepted as a divine tax. The old bled for the young bled for the old, and involuntary suffering was entirely accepted as just the fundamental cost of existing beneath that stone ceiling.
Now, this is exactly how a very specific type of morality is forged. It doesn't come down on stone tablets from a mountaintop. It is smelted in a furnace built entirely of powerlessness. The source notes this perfectly. Every herd calls its huddling love. It is not lying. It has simply never been warm enough to learn the difference. Think about it. If a people cannot fight the wolf, they will eventually call the wolf's absence virtue, and their own fearful huddling wisdom. They literally consecrate their fear into piety. Whispering in the dark, they tell each other, what we cannot conquer, we will name good. Basically forgiving themselves for never having had the strength to even try.
Section 1. The Awakening. Tasting the rust of gilded words. Even a perfect system of consecrated fear like this couldn't hold everyone forever. A small scattering of souls within the valley, those known as the free spirits, began to notice a critical flaw. The gilded words the scribes had been feeding them all their lives began to taste faintly of rust. A stark, defiant realization starts echoing in their minds. Better the hunger that is honest than the feast that is a leash. They realized they wanted something the scribes simply did not sell. They stopped wanting to be comfortable, and they started wanting to be true. It's this quiet, internal rejection of the very feast that was keeping them completely domesticated.
And that brings us to a massive philological shift in the text, fames electa, which translates to the chosen hunger. Now, this is not the valley's involuntary suffering as a tax. No, this is an act of sheer will that actually precedes the deprivation. The free spirits actively selected their hunger. They deliberately chose suffering in service of honesty rather than just passively enduring suffering in service of comfort.
Here is where we see the absolute fundamental divide. On one side, you have the furnace, what we'd call slave morality. This is involuntary suffering accepted as a tax for safety. It's a morality born entirely of reaction and powerlessness. On the other side, we have frama selecta, the raw beginnings of master morality. This is chosen starvation in service of honesty, a morality born of active will and self-determination. Now, from the valley floor, if you look at a person starving because they have no food, and a person starving because they refuse to eat tainted food, they might look completely identical, but philosophically, they are literally worlds apart. The departure of the free spirits wasn't some sudden, fiery, dramatic exodus. It happened more the way a tooth loosens, slowly, deliberately, from a rot that the mouth can't even see. Step 1 is simply realizing that rust on the words. Step 2 is physically walking past the chalk and ash lime line that the scribes had drawn into the dirt 1,000 years prior. Step 3 is the grueling, painful process of unlearning their entire fundamental vocabulary. And finally, Step 4 is confronting whatever actually lay outside the valley.
But when they finally crossed that ancient forbidden boundary, they discovered the valley's best-kept secret. The scribes had always promised absolute destruction to anyone who dared leave. But outside, nothing consumed them. There was no grand, chaotic mouth opening up to swallow their souls. There were absolutely no monsters waiting out there in the dark. There was only wind. The most terrifying realization wasn't the presence of some ultimate evil outside. It was the profound, empty absence of it.
Which leads straight to a shattering epiphany. You see, the free spirits didn't leave because they were suddenly transformed into fearless heroes. They walked toward the wild because they finally recognized the grand illusion of their shelter. They realized that the valley's safety and the valley's cage had all along been built from the exact same gray stone. To be protected by those walls was, by definition, to be imprisoned by them.
Section 2. Journey into the Void. Stripping the Burning House.
So getting out of the valley was only the physical escape. The true cost of this journey was the sheer psychological void they had just stepped into. The wind didn't hand them a new, better set of rules to live by. It handed them nothing. Zero. Unlearning a word that has fed you since infancy is its own unique species of starvation. At first, the free spirits found absolutely nothing out there, but they made a distinct, powerful choice. They chose that void over a comfortable lie. They basically whispered to the wind, "We would rather starve as ourselves than feast as your slaves."
Out there, in the howling void, they began to strip away the scribes' massive moral architecture. They tore it down piece by piece, exactly like a man inside a burning house, throwing out everything that isn't his true self. First word to go? Good. Gone. Stripped away and revealed in the harsh wind, not as some glowing universal truth, but merely as a tool. A concept entirely invented to serve the many who simply cannot serve themselves, designed just to keep the herd huddled together safely.
Next up, evil. Gone, completely torn down and revealed as merely whatever happens to threaten those who have already lost the strength to be threatening themselves. That entire rigid binary of the valley simply crumbled out here in the wind. The labels that had defined their entire existence for generations were shown to be nothing more than the desperate inventions of the powerless, created solely to protect themselves from the strong.
Section 3. The Will to Power. The Raw, Undressed Force.
But here's the twist. Beneath the rubble of the scribes' great moral architecture, there wasn't just an endless, empty void after all. There was a single, ancient, entirely unapologetic force, the will to power. And we're not talking about some comic book villainy here. We are talking about the terrifying, raw, creative force of life itself, completely unmasked and unashamed. It's no longer hiding behind comfortable words like duty or divine tax. This right here is the absolute foundational reality of master morality. The text describes this incredible discovery beautifully. It calls it ugly and radiant, asking nothing of them but the honesty they had spent their whole lives in the valley refusing to afford it. That captures the terrifying beauty of stepping outside the valley perfectly. They traded all their comfortable illusions for a reality that is harsh, yes, but undeniably, radiantly real. And the only thing it demands from them is absolute honesty. And that actually brings us to the end of our journey today, leaving us with a pretty heavy question to ponder. Are you feasting on a chewed lie, or are you ready to starve honestly in the wind? This deep dive really challenges us to examine our own lives. What fears have we secretly consecrated into virtues? Where in our own lives are we swallowing the ceiling and calling it the sky? It is such a fascinating, deeply unsettling piece of philosophy, and it's definitely one that stays with you long after we're done here. I hope this explainer sparked your curiosity to explore these concepts even further on your own. Until next time, keep questioning the walls around you.